My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president. It's been a long time since I said those words the first time. And now I've come here, after seeing our great country, to accept your nomination.
The 1976 Democratic National Convention. The presidential nominee beginning his acceptance speech simply, "My name is Jimmy Carter." He would repeat versions of that signature line in more speeches at more conventions over the following decades. In fact, Jimmy Carter had a presence in nearly every Democratic convention since 1976. But it has been an up and down relationship. Sometimes the convention gave Jimmy Carter a victorious welcome. Sometimes it was an awkward, even rocky acknowledgement. Now the 2024 Democratic Convention approaches. This episode of C-SPAN's podcast, The Weekly, looks back at what Jimmy Carter said and what was said about Jimmy Carter at all the Democratic conventions since 1976.
As more people cancel cable TV, C-SPAN's funding is at risk. This summer, an anonymous donor has stepped up to help by matching all donations up to $25,000. I'm Caitlin with C-SPAN, and this means your gift will go twice as far. Your donation supports unfiltered access to government and public affairs programming, including the C-SPAN podcasts you value. Visit cspan.org/donate to make your gift today. Every dollar helps us reach our $25,000 goal. Thank you for listening and supporting C-SPAN. Donate today at cspan.org/donate.
You probably know that Jimmy Carter holds the record for oldest living former president. And you probably also know Jimmy Carter is the longest-lived president in U.S. history. But here's a record no one talks about. Jimmy Carter attended or addressed or otherwise been involved in the greatest number of Democratic National Conventions by any president. So let's start in 1976, when the Georgia governor was first nominated. He was 51 years old. The Democratic Convention was held the week after America celebrated its bicentennial birthday. It was the aftermath of Watergate and the Vietnam War. And to top all that off, Jimmy Carter became the first and so far only presidential nominee ever to give an acceptance speech that quoted Bob Dylan.
My vision of this nation and its future has been deepened and matured during the 19 months that I've campaigned among you for president. I've never had more faith in America than I do today. We have an America that, in Bob Dylan's phrase, is busy being born, not busy dying.
Jimmy Carter beat President Gerald Ford in 1976, but 1980 was tougher. There was national malaise, a miserable economy, and Americans were held hostage in Iran. Jimmy Carter became the first Democratic president to lose a bid for re-election since Grover Cleveland in 1888. He faced Ronald Reagan, and he faced a hostile audience even from the Democratic crowd inside the convention hall. Jimmy Carter got booed from his own people when he said this.
When Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan, we moved quickly to take action. I suspended some grain sales to the Soviet Union. I called for draft registration. We joined wholeheartedly with the Congress.
Notably, President Carter began his 1980 convention speech with a tribute to his vice president, Walter Mondale.
Fellow Democrats, fellow citizens, I thank you for the nomination you've offered me. And I especially thank you for choosing as my running mate the best partner any president ever had, Fritz Mondale.
Touching sentiments, but they weren't reciprocated. 4 years later, at the 1984 convention, when he was making an acceptance speech, presidential nominee Walter Mondale mentioned Jimmy Carter just once, and it was hardly a glowing tribute.
Ever since I graduated from Elmore High, I've been a Democrat. I was the Attorney General of my state, then a United States Senator, And then an honest, caring man, Jimmy Carter, picked me as running mate. And in 1976, I was elected vice president. Then in 1980, Ronald Reagan beat the pants off us.
The great Los Angeles Times political reporter Jack Nelson wrote that Jimmy Carter was humiliated even by some of his fellow Democrats at the 1980 and 1984 conventions, and he was a virtual outcast. 1988 was different. Jack Nelson wrote that Jimmy Carter's high-profile role in Atlanta stands in stark contrast to his participation in the party convention 4 years ago in San Francisco. Jimmy Carter's primetime speech at the 1988 convention was the most high-profile party event he participated in since leaving the White House. The former president switched up his signature campaign line to poke fun at the frequent efforts of Republican candidate George Bush to remind the nation of the unpopular Carter administration.
Oh, yes, I almost forgot. I have one announcement to make, which, like a lot of other things this year, may come as a bit of a surprise to the incumbent vice president. My name is Jimmy Carter, and I am not running for president. Did you hear that, George?
The signature campaign line showed up again at the 1992 Democratic Convention, even as Jimmy Carter noted his own revival in the party.
My name is Jimmy Carter. And this year, I'm glad I'm not running for president. It is an honor to be invited to speak to this great convention. Each year since 1980, I've been gaining in stature and an appreciation for the party, and tonight I'm glad to be here, even if it is the same time as the All-Star Game.
But things soured again in 1996. Another former Southern governor, Bill Clinton, was in the spotlight. Jimmy Carter, who had attended every Democratic convention since his defeat in 1980, didn't even show up. Instead, he spent the week of the 1996 convention elsewhere. He was in Montana, the farm of Ted Turner and Jane Fonda. Jimmy Carter explained his absence to the New York Times. I have participated in the last 3 conventions when we did not have an incumbent president to re-elect, but will now follow the custom established during the past 40 years by other Democratic presidents, including Harry Truman, who only attended the first convention after he left office. So we skipped to the 2000 convention. So much for established custom. Jimmy Carter was there. He didn't speak, but he did score a tribute video. The convention gave him a standing ovation when California Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein introduced the film.
I'm going to need your attention because I am very proud and have a very special treat to be able to present a film presentation, but the people about whom the film presentation is made are here in the hall tonight. President Jimmy Carter is the only living Democratic former president. He is here. I would like to ask you to acknowledge the presence of Rosalind and Jimmy Carter.
The film included a snippet of Bill Clinton at the Carter Center in Atlanta presenting Jimmy Carter with the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Jimmy and Rosalind Carter have done more good things for more people in more places than any other couple on the face of the earth.
And Bill Clinton mentioned Jimmy Carter in his farewell address as president. Jimmy Carter was in the audience for that, too.
We're fighting head-on the new threats and injustices of the global age: terrorism, narco-trafficking, biological and chemical warfare, the trafficking in women and young girls, and the deadly spread of AIDS. And in the great tradition of President Jimmy Carter, who's here tonight, we are still the world's leading force for human rights around the world. Thank you, President Carter.
2004, another Democratic convention, and another video tribute to Jimmy Carter, this time introduced by New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson.
If you all flew here this weekend on a low-cost airline, you have him to thank.
The 2004 film included a clip of him at the 1976 convention.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
After the 2000 film tribute, Jimmy Carter didn't get to speak, but in 2004, he did.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm not running for president. But here's what I will be doing. Everything I can to put John Kerry in the White House with John Edwards right there beside him.
Now, 2008, and another tribute video. This one profiling Jimmy Carter's work after Hurricane Katrina. The film title, Jimmy Carter, President, Humanitarian. Hurricane Katrina survivor and New Orleans jazz singer Margie Perez introduced the film. She didn't mention the film's focus. Instead, she mentioned the film's director.
It is said that those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. We must never forget what happened to New Orleans. And to help us remember, we have a short film by Academy Award winner director June Beeler that illuminates the lessons of Katrina.
And here's Jimmy Carter in the film.
Well, I've been down here to build homes side by side with these wonderful people in New Orleans who have never given up. Barack Obama's been down here to reach out to people, and his deep awareness of what's going on in the Gulf region, and his deep religious faith as a Christian, and his background as someone who's come from nowhere, you might say, to a high position in the political world. All of those, I think, bode well for America.
What happened next? Here's how political journalist Steve Kornacki reported the 2008 scene. When it was over, Carter and his wife Rosalind walked onto the stage and waved to the crowd as Georgia on My Mind played. They also greeted Nancy Pelosi, who was standing at the edge of the stage and who very publicly threw Carter under the bus 2 years ago and then exited. The whole appearance lasted no more than 90 seconds, an awkward acknowledgement for one of the only two Democrats to win a presidential election since 1964. Steve Kornacki later wrote again about the 2008 scene. Jimmy Carter, Kornacki wrote, was pointedly denied a spot at the podium and allowed only a brief, non-primetime video message. This led to one of the more awkward scenes from the Denver convention. While Carter and his wife walked on stage to wave to the crowd after the video, the podium was lowered into the floor, almost as if convention organizers were making sure he didn't get any ideas. If the relationship between Jimmy Carter and conventions was like a seesaw, then 2012 was an up year. He got to address the convention about the election in a video.
Fellow Democrats, good evening. 36 years ago, on our nation's bicentennial, I accepted your nomination as President of the United States. I said then that America needed a president who shares your dreams and takes the strength and wisdom from you, the American people. Ladies and gentlemen, both now and for the next 4 years, we have just such a leader in the White House. With President Obama in the Oval Office, we can make good progress toward becoming a fairer, stronger, more prosperous, and inclusive America. A nation adjusted to changing and challenging times while holding true to unchanging principles. A leader among the community of nations. Next month, God willing, I will enter the 88th year of my life. And 1 month later, Rosen and I will enter a voting booth in our hometown of Plains and cast another vote for Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
In 2016, a twist. A different member of the Carter family spoke.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome State Senator Jason Carter from Georgia.
Greetings from the battleground state of Georgia. When my grandfather accepted the Democratic nomination for president, he stood before this group and said, "It is time for America to move and to speak not with boasting and belligerence, but with a quiet strength, to depend in the world affairs not merely on the size of an arsenal, but on the nobility of ideas, and to govern at home not by confusion and crisis, but with grace and imagination and common sense." Those words feel even more relevant today than they did 40 years ago. And I promise that he is itching to get on the campaign trail and elect Hillary Clinton.
And then, on video, Jimmy Carter.
Good evening, Democrats. 40 years ago, in our nation's bicentennial year, I stood before you to accept your nomination as president. Rosen and I wish we could be there with you again tonight. to prepare for what will be an extremely important election, one that will define for a generation who we are as a nation and as a people. We Americans have a clear choice before us. I feel proud that the two Democratic candidates who competed throughout a long primary season, Senator Bernie Sanders and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, comported themselves with dignity, talked about issues that matter, and presented a vision for our nation.
Finally, the 2020 convention, held virtually because of the pandemic. It was the first time former First Lady Rosalind Carter spoke.
It's a great pleasure for Jimmy and me to join you in celebrating our next President of the United States, Joe Biden. We've known and admired Joe and Jill for many years, and most recently, I've worked with him on tackling the demands faced by the more than 53 million unpaid caregivers in our country who are juggling work and other family responsibilities and putting their own physical and mental health and well-being at risk.
Then Jimmy Carter.
When I ran for president in 1976, Joe Biden was my first and most effective supporter in the Senate. For decades, he has been my loyal and dedicated friend. Joe has the experience, character, and decency to bring us together and restore America's greatness.
At the time of the 2020 convention, he was 96 years old. It was his 11th appearance, in person or on video, at a Democratic convention. And now, a bonus clip. We return to the 1992 Democratic Convention. C-SPAN interviewing Jimmy Carter.
Will you put into words what it's like to stand at a podium and accept your party's nomination for the presidency?
Well, it's a euphoric feeling, and I would say particularly the first time in 1976 when I had come from nowhere. Nobody dreamed I had a chance to win. I was a Southern governor. We hadn't had a president from the Deep South since the 1840s, and I prevailed over everybody else and came with a group of Democrats that year, most of whom were new to politics. You know, all of my opponents were much better known than I was, and so the annual dedicated Democrats who always took a part had pledged themselves to other people, whereas I had the new ones. So it was a new bunch. And there was an element of excitement or electricity about that convention that hasn't been seen since, even in 1980. Well, it's a good feeling, and obviously there were waves of applause and approbation and hope from people, which I was sobered to see, and in my heart, placed myself not to let those folks down. And I think it's indescribable. Other than that, it's just a time of gratification and determination not to betray their trust.
What will they say about Jimmy Carter at the 2024 Democratic Convention? Here's an easy way to find out. Simply watch and listen live on the C-SPAN network's gavel-to-gavel coverage. Just like you did for the 2024 Republican Convention. You even heard a mention of Jimmy Carter from Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn.
Under Biden and Harris, people are also crushed by more regulations than at any time since Jimmy Carter.
For now, thanks for listening, happy searching, and to play us out for our closing music, we return one last time to the 1976 Democratic Convention and the jazzy 70s-era sound that filled legendary Madison Square Garden in equally legendary New York City, right after Jimmy Carter gave his acceptance speech.
We will go forward from this convention with some differences of opinion, perhaps, but nevertheless, united in a calm determination to make our country at large and driving and generous in spirit once again, ready to embark on great national deeds, and once again, as brothers and sisters, our hearts will swell with pride to call ourselves Americans. Thank you very much.